Okay, so the first essay is an agree or disagree essay. So the key point is that you need to have an opinion and you need to argue for the agree or disagree side of it. So it's going to be talking about whether richer nations should be taking responsibility to help poorer nations in terms of development. So that's the main focus of the essay topic. So let's have a look at the introduction. So the introduction goes, it's a common belief that developed countries should help poorer countries, but by providing them, this should be with medical care, education for children, and international trade. And they should have responsibilities, and it should be have responsibility for them. However, I firmly believe that it is not compulsory for richer countries to take more responsibility, so it should be singular, for poorer countries, because the citizens of their own countries should be the priority, and poor countries can become too dependent when a certain level of support is given. So the reason we need to put to here is that you're trying to make an argument, you have to show your opinion. So just saying countries can become dependent is a neutral statement. So we don't know whether being dependent is good or bad, but when we add the word to, it's giving it the negative connotation. So now we know that being dependent is a bad thing because you're becoming too dependent. So what's that doing? That's supporting your agreement or disagreeing. So that's how you're showing your opinion to the person who's reading the essay, and we know what you're going to argue. Okay, and the other thing is that this answer needs to be paraphrasing more. So in the question, we've got richer nations and we've got poorer nations. So what we've got here, we've got developed countries, poorer countries, we've got richer countries, I think we've got poorer countries again, and we've got poor countries again. So what I can see from this answer he's doing here is whoever wrote this essay isn't paraphrasing enough, and we've got the repetition of countries, 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 countries. Okay, so in the question they have got nations, but in this answer they're using countries too many times, and so they should be paraphrasing countries more. They can use nations again, they could use states, or they could give an example of what country they're talking about. So I did like how they went for richer and they went for developed, they went for richer again, but the issue is that they've said poorer, poorer, and poor again here, which is copying what's in the question. So whoever wrote this introduction needs to work more on their paraphrasing and their synonyms and come up with more ways to say poor. So you can say less developed, you can say economically less developed, you can say third world nations is a high level paraphrase. So if you don't know what third world nation means, it means the economically less developed countries. So if you use that, that would be quite a high-level paraphrase that would increase your vocabulary score. Okay, so that's the introduction. Okay, so then we go on to the first paragraph. So this is supposed to be the first part of their argument. So because it's an agree or disagree question, you don't have to discuss both sides equally. So this should be the first supporting point they have for what their argument is. So if we remember from the introduction, this person's arguing that richer countries should not have to take responsibilities for poor countries, okay? So to begin with, for every country, it's important to consider their own citizens first when there are multiple matters. So my first issue here in this sentence, multiple matters, it's too vague. What do you mean by multiple matters? If you're going to, when there are, he should be specific about what they're going to talk about and the issues. I don't know what multiple matters he means. Is it economic? Is it political? Is it taxes? What are they going to talk about? The main reason is that the people pay taxes according to the law, and those taxes are generated from the income. So my issue here is with his determiners. So when he says the main issue is that the people, when I'm reading that, my question is, whose people? Okay? He needs to be specific. The main reason is that their people, okay? The people of this country that he's talking about, their own citizens. Their people pay taxes, and those taxes are generated from the income. So again, whose income? From their income, okay? Or you could also say, you could also say from their citizens instead of people if you wanted to paraphrase more, or their population. Okay. The income is derived from the time and effort people spend doing what? People spend working. What are you spending? Spending time working. Effort that people spend working and is collected by the government, which has a responsibility to protect the citizens and maximize their wealth by improving whose? Improving their quality of life. Therefore, by paying taxes, the majority of the population, okay, because again, you're saying the majority of what? The majority of who? The majority of the population expects some kind of compensation. For instance, improved infrastructure, which can make people's lives better. Suppose the government spending is mainly on foreigners in other countries who do not even pay tax. Eventually, this can lead to a massive amount of complaints, and people can conduct protests as well, which can cause an unstable atmosphere in a country. So again, my issue is specifics. In a country, which country? The country that we've just talked about. So he's giving an example of a government who spends money on foreigners. So this is the country we're talking about. So it shouldn't be a country. He's giving a specific example. So it needs to be the country. So my main issue with this final sentence is that he repeats the word can 3 times. Okay? It's got can conduct as well as can. It makes sense. There's nothing wrong with using can, but the issue is that he's used can 3 times. So if he wants to improve the vocabulary score, he should be paraphrasing and using different words for can. So what words could we use? He could use could, he could use might. So he said this can lead to a massive amount of complaints, and people could conduct protests as well, which might cause an unstable atmosphere in the country. He could use may as well if he wanted to. Okay, so then in the same sentence, can make sense, but you want to paraphrase it to improve your vocabulary score. So those are 3 examples in this sentence where he could improve that area. So there's some positive stuff in this paragraph. I like the use of the word compensation. I like improved infrastructure. I thought that was quite good vocabulary, quite specific to the issue. He's talking about paying taxes. So I thought that was quite specific vocabulary. He knows you should pay taxes. And the use of the word generated and derived. Income is derived from the time and effort. So there were some positive points to this, but overall I thought he needed to work on paraphrasing more. There's a couple of points where he's vague with the meaning. However, overall the meaning is clear and there weren't any areas where I didn't understand the point that they were trying to make. So then if we go on to the second paragraph, he says, on top of that, when the aid is given to poorer countries, overall they can become too dependent on the support and purpose, and the purpose of aid becomes meaningless. So the main purpose of aid, including health and education, is to provide the knowledge that is essential for people in developing countries. So here, the purpose of aid, this should be his separate clause, including health and education. Okay, so this is the main sentence. The main purpose of aid is to provide the knowledge that is essential for people in developing countries. But because he's got including health and education in here, he's breaking up his sentence. So it's more difficult for me to understand what he means because he's put this extra clause in here. So it needs to be separated either with a bracket, he can separate it with commas, you can separate it with a dash. So this is where your knowledge of punctuation is important because that separates that idea. And when I'm reading it as a reader, I know that this is the main idea. We've taken a break and then we're back to the main idea again here. The main purpose of aid is to provide the knowledge that is essential for people in developing countries. However, if people from economically developing countries continue to accept the service only, again, so this is the same as we had before. For me, this is too vague. You need to be specific. What service? What do you mean by that? Okay, it's not, I don't actually know what he means with this sentence, so it needs to be more specific. Without the passion to learn about it, these countries can easily become dependent and people tend to become lazy. As the long-term developing countries are highly likely to expect those services and support to continue. Thus, they cannot survive alone without relying on other countries. This is a very good sentence. I like this sentence a lot. It was clear. He used a good linking word here, which I liked. He used thus. He had good use of punctuation. It was a more complex sentence. So I thought that was a very good sentence. In other words, AIDS can make worse conditions in poorer countries. So in other words, so this sentence is kind of mixed up. The use of words. So in other words, aid, so this should be singular, it's not plural. In other words, aid can make conditions in poorer countries worse. Worse should go at the end of the sentence here. Okay, so even though I can understand the meaning of the sentence, the word placement makes it slightly confusing. It means that as a reader, I have to go back and read the sentence twice. So if I have to go back and read the sentence twice, it means that your grammar is not great. So this was, I thought, a much better paragraph. There's a little bit of still vague, this idea of the service, provide the knowledge that is essential. I think that this, again, is a little bit vague, and it could be improved by giving some more supporting examples or be more specific about what exactly that he means. And then when we get to the conclusion, support from economically developed nations should not be made to developing countries, as governments should consider their citizens as their priority, and it will be not helpful to underdeveloped nations over a longer period of time. For these reasons, it is not mandatory for rich countries to take responsibility for other countries. So this should be, it should not be mandatory. Okay, you're making a suggestion. This is a hypothetical situation. It's not a real law that you're arguing against. So it should be should. So it is not mandatory. You're saying a statement of fact, but because this is a hypothetical situation, we should be using the word should. It should not be mandatory for rich countries to take responsibility for other countries. So overall, there were some good points to the essay. There was some stuff that I liked, some stuff that I thought was weaker on. So overall, for task achievement, I thought it gave a 7 because I thought the argument was clear all the way through. In the introduction, they made it clear what they thought their answer was going to be, and they supported it with both the points that they made. So I was able to clearly follow the argument all the way through. Some of the arguments are a little bit general or a little bit vague, but I didn't think that was a real issue. For coherence and cohesion, I gave it a 7. They have the main issues are they had a clear central point for each paragraph, and their argument built from the introduction clearly to the conclusion. So I could follow them developing their argument across the whole essay. For vocabulary, I gave a 6.5. There was some vagueness in the vocabulary, and there was a couple of places where I thought they could have paraphrased a bit better. But overall, I thought they made a good attempt to use a variety of words. The same for grammar. There was a couple of vague sentences, some missing words and some issues, but overall their meaning was always clear, and none of their mistakes made me misunderstand what they were trying to say, or not really be able to understand. So overall, I would have given it a 6.5 for that essay.